ideas that he knew would quietly change the way we think, change the way we behave, change our picture of ourselves, change even our cultural life, how we respond to pleasures, our choice of foods, our choice of clothes or dress styles. He came and he began to quietly change and affect all of that because he saw here are people taken away from and lost to their own identity, but who had evolved very naturally on earth, and now they don't have it anymore. They don't have any connection with their natural evolved life traditions, and as a consequence, there is a hunger in their souls, in their psyche, to have that sense restored to them, end quote. The cure made from the disease, racism and symbolism. Paradoxically, Imam Muhammad's language was not only a source of contribution, but also a source of controversy as well. So it was a language in its varied incarnations that was at once the problem and the solution in the mission of Imam Muhammad. And it is only through understanding the origins, the nature, and the necessity of the movement of his particular language that the true value of his contribution to the Muslim community and the world can be grasped. Many inoculations or diseases are made from the substance of the diseases themselves. The object being for the body to create a natural immunity through the production of antigens by the introduction of the right measure of the disease to the system. Professor Farad used white supremacy as the model for his black supremacist Nation of Islam. He couched his doctrine in symbolic language and called it the religion. It was the extreme irony of the resulting situation that made the work and mission of Imam Muhammad such a tremendous task and a modern miracle. Simply put, before Imam Muhammad, before he could cure the disease that arose out of the tragic history of African Americans in chattel slavery with the true cure of al-Islam, before he could apply it, he had to cure the disease that was caused by the first cure of the disease, the Nation of Islam. Do you understand that? Well, he said there was trauma happened, and here comes somebody working to cure the trauma, and it was a good cure, but it also had many, many side effects, just like when you listen to these drug commercials on TV, right? I mean, they'll tell you, okay, buy this drug. Okay, but it might kill you, you might go blind, it might cripple you crazy, but you'll get good sleep at night, right? So there was some real serious side effects to the cure of the Nation of Islam. So Imam Muhammad had to cure the cure before he could bring the true cure. That's the point that they're seeking to make right there, okay? So the state of the Nation of Islam at the time of Imam Muhammad could be described as a psychologically speaking, as a civilizational infancy. It was actually with the passing of Elijah Muhammad that the baby nation, as he described it, was born. However, due to the nature of the language womb that the members were being birthed from, they could still be described as a people waddling in their own blood. This state was one of the ways Imam Muhammad described the fundamentally racist socio-psychological condition of the members of the Nation of Islam at the time. Battling against the implicit and explicit racism in the doctrine and in the minds of the members of the Nation of Islam at the time was one of the most fiercely fought battles between Imam Muhammad and the ethos of the Nation of Islam as it became the world community of Islam in the West. A watershed moment in the evolving of the world community of Islam in the West, formerly Nation of Islam, was during one of Imam Muhammad's final Savior's Day address. In it, he slammed the black supremacy and its loyal adherents. He said this, quote, "We have common enemies, black, brown, red, yellow, and white. We all have a common enemy. That enemy is the one who feeds all of us color consciousness, who feeds all of us racism, and keeps all of us divided. One color consciousness is enemy of all against the others so that he can by himself rule all of us. Mister, don't buy that stuff about no spook, about no demon ruling the world and setting races against each other." The Imam replies, He said, I'm talking about those who create and orchestrate racism in the world while they stay out of sight, pitting whites against blacks, blacks against whites, races against races. We have proven facts that at certain times they have shifted the whole climate and put black supremacy in fashion. Then at later periods in the history of humanity, they have stripped the whole climate and have put white supremacy in fashion. But we've got the son of a gun's water on now. We're going to cook him to death. The earth is too small for that kind of foolishness, end quote. During this period of time, Minister Louis Farrakhan had been about 2 years into rebuilding the Nation of Islam, quote unquote, in antagonism to the thrust towards true al-Islam. As will be shown shortly, the logical extension and the spiritual intention of Professor Farad was to pure al-Islam, the true and complete cure. Nevertheless, the initial battles of Imam Muhammad were against the cherished misconceptions and mythologies of the Nation of Islam that had taken up residency in the hearts and minds of so many of his followers, some of them as long as 40 years. Though there was an important unity gathering in the year 2000, 20 years prior to that battle, the hearts and minds of the followers of Elijah Muhammad raged hot and heavy. Imam Muhammad had some choice words for Minister Farrakhan and his followers at that time. He said, quote, Farrakhan is playing games with them. He's playing into their hands. He's enjoying material benefits just to play into their hands and playing their game for material benefits and a little popularity. They send Farrakhan all around college campuses. He has more freedom than I have. They invite him all over everywhere. They want him to talk to our people. They don't want me to talk to our people. They would like to see me shut up. If it wasn't for the few strong people in this society, I wouldn't be able to reach anybody. But Allah has blessed me with some friends in this society. So eventually they help me get on TV. They help me to get on radio. They help me to get somewhere. But Farrakhan, he's pushed. Our people don't want Farrakhan. They're pushing Farrakhan on the people. Farrakhan's time is out. That black racist talk is out. But they are pushing him on. They want him to go on and on so they can build up black supremacy, because that's the only way they can keep the whole world ignorant. And under them is to operate race consciousness through race consciousness. Now I know Farrakhan has some of his people here. I wish he was here. And go back and tell him, you cream puff, powder puff, so-called black but white leader. He's not black, he's white. Anytime he serves black supremacy, he's white. And anyone who advocates black supremacy is advocating white supremacy. And he who serves black supremacy is serving white supremacy. And there's no way to advocate black supremacy without advocating white supremacy. Impossible. So go back and tell him that I will meet with him anytime before any audience, and I want to see him stand 5 minutes in my presence. Tell him I said he's a high-paid superfly weakling that will sell out the dignity of his race just to have some popularity in the public eye among people who aren't fit for anything, most of them, and to enjoy some material comfort. When he was with me, he said I was right. He knew how I felt about the teaching of Elijah Muhammad. He said I was right. He accepted my leadership. But when he saw that he wasn't going to be able to get a new Mercedes-Benz, a new diamond ring, enough money to flounce around in the cities before the people's eyes, he decided he would go where the butter was thicker. End quote. Symbolism. Another dimension of the cure carrying the disease that needed to be cured before the real cure could be effected was the language womb of the symbolism of the Nation of Islam, which had captured the hearts and minds of its members for nearly 40 years. The English term infant comes from the French word meaning without speech. On a civilizational scale of true humanity, the Nation of Islam was an infant without speech. The Nation of Islam couldn't speak the language of universal human civilization. It was speaking the language of myth and black supremacy. It couldn't speak the human message of Quranic language. And therein was the second important battle for Imam Muhammad. It was the battle of universal human language against the racist and symbolic language that had been, unbeknownst to his members, oppressing them. That language needed to be defeated in order to effectuate the true human liberation. This posed yet another important multifaceted dilemma for all concerned. The dilemma included the former members of the Nation of Islam, now following Imam Muhammad out of the mystical maze of Professor Farad, the world Muslim community listening to and watching the transformation of the Nation of Islam play out, and those looking at the bleak facts on the ground in the African American community, and alternately at Minister Farrakhan, Imam Muhammad, and trying to decide who's right. Imam Muhammad's early language was roundly criticized by many so-called Orthodox Muslims who had no idea of what constituted the diagnosis, prognosis, and prescription for the Nation of Islam after Elijah Muhammad. Imam Muhammad, on the other hand, was intimately familiar with all of it and prepared in all areas. What most of the critics failed to understand was that such an operation, what it would actually require. They were not in a position to understand that what the Imam had to do was to extricate the followers delicately from the spiritual and moral contraption which had served them as a form of rehabilitation for decades, but which was never intended to be the final Muslim home. Nor were the Imam's critics in a position to understand that in order to address those prior conditions, it was necessary to use some of the same type of language that had held the Nation of Islam membership in order to set them free from it. It was a kind of inoculation. As a consequence, and out of necessity, Imam Muhammad's early messages were interpretations designed to set the captive free of the whole of the old language itself. The language that he was giving at that time was a kind of bridge language, and that language was not the destiny. True human freedom and liberation was the destiny for those people, but they had to be met where they lived at the time. The members of the Nation of Islam had been taught an extreme mythology of their own existence and the creation of other races. They were taught to expect a spaceship to come with bombing planes that would drop bombs and would create mountains and set America on fire, and only America would burn for 690 years, would take 310 years to cool off. They had been taught that the successful ones who maintained the proper body weight and could recognize the language on leaflets dropped 8 or 10 days before the arrival would be allowed to get on the plane to be taken to Mecca, where they would learn Arabic in the twinkling of an eye. This was the audience that Imam Muhammad, the chief minister Wallace, was met with in February 26, 1975. Though the Imam was incensed when he first realized the fictional character of Farad's teaching, which had been given to the Nation of Islam as Islam, he came to realize its true nature, structure, and intention. Imam Muhammad explained to his following in the initial response to this, his initial response to this realization, and the new equilibrium he achieved upon a better understanding of it. The Imam said, quote, "When I first woke up to what was going on, I rejected him too. I said, this man, if I could find him, I would kill him. Farad, I said, if I could find him alive, I would kill him for doing this to us. But as I studied his teaching more, I saw it was really a clever scheme to bring us from being dependent on the thinking in the world to trust our own thinking and find our way in the path of humanity by ourselves, and it worked. It really worked." In another address to the imams of his community, the Imam explained further. He said, quote, "I came to see it really as what they call satire. It's a piece of satire, a W.D. Farad piece of satire on the evils of white supremacy. Yes, it was a piece of satire on the evils of white supremacy, and he drew from the Bible and other sources that he could draw from to put satire together," end quote. So it was upon this intimate knowledge of the history of the African American people, their struggles throughout the history to restore their lost human properties, Professor Farad's grasp of the same, and his institutionalization of that grasp in the form of the Nation of Islam, and finally the decipherment of the cryptic symbolism of Professor Farad, that Imam Muhammad crafted a new language particularly suited to the mind that was the byproduct of all these features. I'm going to step out there a little. I know y'all not used to me just looking down and reading paper and all that. I understand that. But if you heard me from the beginning, just listen to the idea. Listen, just think about a surgeon that has a very special operation that he has. You have this client, you have this patient, and their artery is in a